If there's no real trade market for Brandon Ingram, is there a chance the Pelicans bring him back on a super team-friendly deal? I'll explain why that might be the best thing for both Brandon Ingram and the Pels. Plus, Daniel Theis is the newest Pelican, and I'll tell you what he brings to the team. It's the Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we're going to look at Brandon Ingram's potential future contract with the Pelicans because it doesn't seem like there's a very big market for him, and maybe why he should take a team-friendly deal right now. Plus, the Pelicans signed Daniel Theis. What does the newest Pelicans big man bring to the team? What's his expected role this season as well? And then there's definitely going to be another trade or two coming, not just for the Pelicans, but the NBA in general, and I'll explain why. That's coming up here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. Become an everydayer. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast out there, so please subscribe. So Will Guillory, friend of Locked On Pelicans, regular guest last season, likely, I gotta ask him, but should be, again, this coming year, reported for The Athletic that the Atlanta Hawks had no interest really in Brandon Ingram, including Brandon Ingram in a DeJounte Murray deal and including one of their centers, Clint Capella or Onyeka Okongwu, in a deal here. And it was because they didn't want to pay Brandon Ingram's future contract. And this seems to be the sticking point for Brandon Ingram and a Brandon Ingram trade in general. No one seems to want to give him the max money. You're seeing, that second apron, something we've talked a lot about here on Locked On Pelicans when we've gone into the salary cap, into the collective bargaining agreement, and how that kind of rules the NBA here. That second apron and the lack of flexibility it gives you really scares off a lot of teams. So if you're not a max player, you're probably not getting max money anymore. We've had a couple of years of inflated salaries, it seems like, for a lot of guys, and that maybe is now coming back down to earth a little bit. And that's maybe why a guy like DeJounte Murray on a much team-friendlier contract than Atlanta's Trae Young was the guy that ultimately ended up being moved. So what does this mean? At this point, if Atlanta didn't want Brandon Ingram, they could use a wing next to Trae Young like him. They really could. If a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers don't seem to have an interest in Brandon Ingram with the redundancies they have at the guard and center position, because it's not that he's a bad player, they just don't want to pay him. And if he wants a max, well, that's going to present a problem. But what this could ultimately end up leading to is him staying with New Orleans and signing an extension that's a team-friendly deal. Because here's the thing. Imagine if he was a free agent this year. Yeah, maybe a team like Detroit would have signed him for big money, but you're not going to go win anything of note in Detroit for a couple of years. And when you look at how teams were spending their salary cap space, well, it doesn't exactly imply that he'll have a robust market in a year. Now, I've said I don't think it would be smart for the Pelicans to bring him onto the team next season without an extension, and we'll get into his extension here in a second. But think about it from Brandon Ingram's perspective. If you start trying to project, if you and your agent, your representation, right, start looking a year from now, go, okay, we won't accept any extension from the New Orleans Pelicans that's not a max. Maybe we'll just take our chances in free agency next year. I mean, everyone is basically screaming at Brandon Ingram, we're not going to pay you what you think. Otherwise, a trade would have happened by now. This is a guy that can go out and give you 25, 5, and 5 a night, and no one is lining up to acquire that guy because of what his future contract is going to be. Is he going to have that type of leverage in free agency that he thinks he will next season? I don't really know. And free agency doesn't really exist like it used to, and there were only a couple of teams with significant cap space this past summer. And it got spent very quickly, and Brandon Ingram maybe could get that next year, but maybe not. And you end up seeing this the past couple of years where that upper middle class of players, which is what I would put Brandon Ingram in. He's not, like a mid-level exception guy. He's better than that, but he's also not a top level type of player. They often get squeezed and have to take really subpar 1-year deals. How many guys have you seen sign for the mid-level exception around, $12 million for a 1, 2, or 3-year deal for 1 year on kind of like a prove-it contract? Brandon Ingram next year could get kind of squeezed into that type of situation if he doesn't start doing some planning now. And so if New Orleans comes and offers him a deal that pays him $25 to $30 million annually, which is probably where he should be for a player of his quality and for the limitations that he has, that's the type of thing that I think, maybe he needs to start thinking about. And this is how New Orleans could bring him back and sign him to a team-friendly deal and have, pretty good team control over him, and thus would raise his trade value. But it also ensures for Ingram that he gets paid $25 million next year or $12 million. That's kind of the risk that he's running against right now. I do think there's about a month or so that the Pelicans have to kind of figure this situation out. I do think it would be a bad idea to bring him into training camp into next season without an extension. But even if you can get a 2-year deal done, a 2-year extension, a 3-year extension that's for a medium amount of money, I think that benefits both parties involved because Brandon Ingram's taking a pretty big risk, kind of betting on himself. And look, that's good. Do that sort of thing. Get money. I agree with that. I'm on the player's side with this sort of thing. But I think this is very telling if you're him and his representation. And look, and this is me being a little bit biased and not exactly knowing how all the details are going to shake out. That's the type of thing that if you're his representation, you probably need to call the Pelicans and be like, okay, so what's the starting number? Can we come to some sort of agreement sooner rather than later? Because the longer this drags out, it feels like it just knocks his value down even more. And for the Pelicans, look, if there's just no value for him this summer, and it doesn't appear to be with that, you could, in theory, go into next season without an extension. You'll move him at the trade deadline for pennies on the dollar at that point, or just keep him and let him expire if some of the offers are truly bad. But if you can't get anything for him now, it's not like you'll necessarily, if he doesn't sign an extension, get anything for him later. And so if the offers are trash for him, well, then you may as well just stick with him because it's not like you're losing out on much instead. So I think there's more to come with this scenario. I think the most likely thing is he'll end up being traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers. We are firmly, and we'll talk about this in the third part of today's show, in the trade part of the offseason. Summer League's just around the corner. We'll have more on that here on Locked On Pelicans soon. And when that gets, everyone out in Vegas, maybe deals get done, it becomes the center point, the epicenter of the NBA for 2 weeks or so. So that could be a time when something gets done, and I think that could be kind of important to look at too. But I think we'll have, an idea within the next month of what's going to end up happening with Brandon Ingram. But he could be putting himself in a position to lose or leave a lot of money on the table if he's not willing to entertain what the Pelicans could be offering him right now. Now, while they're trying to figure all of this out, the Pelicans did go and make a signing. Daniel Theis, your newest Pelicans big man. Let's break down what he brings to the team because he's a bit of a different center than what we've seen from other guys before. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Do you often tend to compare your lives to others? Does social media play a part in that? And what do you do when you caught up in wishing your life looked like someone else's? Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. And it might look like they have it all together on Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. So therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so that you can start living your best life. Life doesn't come with an instruction manual. Sometimes it's tough to figure out why you feel the way you do or what you should do about it, but therapy is extremely valuable for just helping you be the best version of yourself. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. What I love about it, and I've used it before, is that it's entirely online. I don't have time to go drive to a doctor's office, wait around, then go in, then drive home. Too many things going on in my life. This is, you hop on your computer, your phone, your tablet, whatever it might be, and you have your therapy session and you get what you're looking for. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to try today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. We'll do another live show soon to answer your questions. But if you've got questions, put them in the comments down below. It's a time where we can kind of really answer a lot of what you are curious about, turn them into whole shows here. So put your question in the comments down below. It might turn into an episode of Locked On Pelicans. So for your second listen, Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson making sense of everything black and gold. Go subscribe to the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. So the Pelicans did something in free agency. Hooray. It's a minimum signing, which is really all they can do at this point, given that they're hard capped at the first apron. And we talked a lot about that in yesterday's show. If you haven't listened to that one, go give it a listen. It gives you a lot of insight onto kind of how the Pelicans are operating at the moment here. But they can make a minimum signing or two. And given that, it's kind of getting to be slim pickings here in free agency, doing something because they absolutely need some more front court depth or just like bodies in general outside of Yves Missi and Zion Williamson, making some sort of signing was a good thing to do before it got real just empty, barren, and there wasn't a whole lot going on there. So they signed Daniel Theis. And frankly, I don't hate this move. I don't think this is a significant move necessarily, but I don't think it's that bad. And for a minimum signing, you could do a whole lot worse. It's worth noting that Daniel Theis, was probably heading to Europe. If the Pelicans didn't sign him, looked like he was on his way out of the NBA. He's going to be playing for Germany in the Olympics here as one of their main guys as well. But this is someone who has starting experience at the NBA, is pretty mobile, and has done it for like contending teams. He started his career with Boston, was with the Clippers last season, spent some time, even though not many games, with Indiana as well. He's been a little bit all over the place as a journeyman, but this is a guy that is, again, mobile, has a little bit of a size issue at 6'8", but the way I view him is the replacement for Larry Nance Jr. He can start in a pinch. He plays a little bit bigger than, his size indicates him to be. And overall, you could do worse as a backup big man. He's, about an average rebounder for the position, not elite. I wouldn't call him, bad at it, but I wouldn't call him particularly great either. He just does a lot of things particularly okay. And that's kind of what the Pelicans need. And that's what a minimum signing is going to give you. For his career, this is someone who's averaged 7.4 points per game, 4.8 rebounds. He has a tendency at times to shoot threes. I wouldn't call him a good court spacer. I wouldn't call him a court spacer at all. I wouldn't call him a good 3-point shooter. His career 33% on 1.5 attempts per game. That's not someone who's going to space the court. Larry Nance Jr. shot better from three than Daniel Theis probably for their careers really has. So it's not the exact same kind of player, but it's also, probably the best the Pelicans were going to be able to do at this point in time. And to just get some depth, someone, again, who can start in a pinch, give you some minutes there. I do think that's worthwhile. Yeah, Larry Nance Jr. has a better career 3-point shooting percentage than Daniel Theis does. But for a minimum signing, for where you're at in free agency right now, and more on how they'll get other pieces in the next segment here, you could do a whole lot worse than this. So I'm okay with this signing. Again, it doesn't really move the needle, but they needed to do something. The Pelicans likely need another center coming in, whether that's through a trade, whether it's through free agency, whatever it might be. That's kind of what you were looking at with this. Brandon Ingram, and, we talked about it in yesterday's show, is likely the path to a starting center. That's how you're going to get a major upgrade, I think, at that position. But given what free agency was looking like, just making a move right now was pretty smart. It doesn't exactly limit options for the New Orleans Pelicans when it comes to the Brandon Ingram trade because it's a minimum signing. You can always do those. That's at least worthwhile for New Orleans to just get this piece of business done. And there you go. I mean, that's Daniel Theis, right? Like, this doesn't need the biggest breakdown, the biggest reaction. I think the biggest thing here we see is he's more of a backup. Like, this guy should not be the starting center for the team next season, unless it's an injury or something along those lines. I don't think he's going to be a court spacer. Maybe he's been working on kind of reinventing himself to shoot more threes to, extend his NBA career. He did for the Clippers in 59 games last year, shoot 37% from three, but it's on 1.2 attempts per game, right? He's making a total of 0.4 threes per game. This is not like that mobile stretch big that we've really been hoping they'll one day put next to Zion Williamson that they still haven't truly done just yet. It's a depth signing. They needed this. This gives them, really two more open roster spots that they need to fill out. Truly at this point, then one. You can go into the regular season, I think, with one open roster spot. That's fine. Not really two. It would make me a little bit nervous there in terms of, kind of foul trouble and emergencies and all that injuries that kind of come up with this team. They need more big men. It's really that simple. I think Theis can play, let you bring Yves Missi along really slowly, but it's not like he gives you particularly strong rim protection. He's not horrible at it. He is a little bit fearless down low and doesn't mind going and attacking and has moments where he, shows you something there. But at this point in his career, 32 years old, was going to maybe be out of the league. It kind of is what it is, right? And given that the Pelicans are in this position where they're trying to figure out what to do with the center spot because they're not able to easily trade Brandon Ingram, as we're learning here. That's kind of where they are. It's for what it is, it's a good signing. I think that's the best way to kind of like look at it, put it in its proper context. For what it is, it's a good signing, and I think that's the most important thing to really look at here with New Orleans. Not going to be the difference maker. If they want to go and get another starting center, like that's what they should be really working on. But I do think some things are going to probably open up a little bit more in the future. And I think there's a pathway to other centers, which maybe we'll get into later in the week when we look at specific names. I have some trade options in mind when it comes to that. But there's going to be more. You're going to see some teams start to sell off some pieces soon. And there's a reason for that. And it has to do with Team USA. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop, but it's the summer and things slow down. So as the playoffs wind down, we're getting fewer games. The sports aren't sporting like we want them to, but FanDuel is going to let me keep the sports going whenever I want, and all I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel has given all customers a boost or bonus daily. That's right. This summer, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You've got the Olympics coming up. There's still a lot of high-level soccer on right now. You have Major League Baseball. You have the All-Star Game, the Home Run Derby. You want to get in on the action? FanDuel has it for you. So there's plenty of action to be had. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So let's get into this. The Pelicans roster doesn't need to be set today. It doesn't need to be set in a week or even in a month. It doesn't even necessarily need to be set, at the start of the regular season. Look at what the Dallas Mavericks did at the trade deadline and how, even though I don't think that's sustainable, propelled them going forward, with what they were looking to do and kind of make their run to the finals. Okay, that's good. And I think you could still get something like that with New Orleans. They have that $10 million trade exception, and we will look at guys that fit into that, I think, and how acquirable they are for the Pelicans, including starting centers, because I do think there are some guys that you could go and get probably fairly easily for New Orleans, and I think that would be fine. But one thing that's worth keeping an eye on is this year there's going to be some tanking. There's going to be some tanking in a way that there wasn't this past season. This upcoming draft is thought to be loaded compared to this past draft that doesn't. And Cooper Flagg, who's a commit to Duke for this coming year, was invited to the Team USA select team, where, by the way, Trey Murphy is, and lit it up in a scrimmage with the, basically like all-star dream team for Team USA. He did exceptionally well and surprised everybody, basically holding his own against like everyone on that team being a future Hall of Famer, it feels like. And this is a guy who at just 17 years old did that. Gonna go to Duke. He's probably gonna be the number one draft pick, 6'8", 6'9", type of player, wing player that looks like he's gonna be able to be a franchise cornerstone. You're gonna see some teams kind of take note of this performance because trust me, everyone had someone in Vegas watching this. And you're gonna see some teams kind of blow it up and start tanking a little bit more because if you can get this guy, it feels like a game-changing move. So while maybe the trade market feels a little bit stagnant with some of these teams, I think you're going to look at a team like the Charlotte Hornets, realize, we're kind of in this middle ground where we're never really going to contend. We're barely pushing for the play-in tournament. Maybe it would be better to acquire another future first-round pick and trade one of our players. Mark Williams, perhaps. That's a center right there. That's going to make them a little bit worse. It's going to mean then maybe they have a better chance at Cooper Flagg. You have the Portland Trailblazers, and this is a guy we'll talk more about this week, DeAndre Ayton. Do they really need him? Should they truly try and be competitive right now? Or is it better to sell off pieces and then try and tank for Cooper Flagg? The Utah Jazz are going to be in an interesting decision on what they do with Walker Kessler, right? That's a name that's long been linked to the Pelicans now. Even if it's separate from Larry Markkinen, is that a guy that New Orleans should try and go and get, knowing that maybe it's best for the Utah Jazz to kind of tank for Cooper Flagg or whatever the catchy phrase is going to be. I have no idea what it's for Cooper Flagg. If you have a good one, let me know. But you're going to see a lot of teams doing that. And maybe they don't realize that right at the start of the regular season. Maybe they realize that at the trade deadline. And New Orleans can still make a significant move then that brings in that missing piece. And that's why they want to keep some of this flexibility open, I think. And that's why I said at the beginning of this segment, your roster doesn't need to be set right now. And David Griffin said that. It doesn't need to be set right now. It doesn't even really need to be set at the start of training camp. You can make some changes, and that can be a really important thing for you and kind of propel you to that next stage. And I think they're looking at the Dallas Mavericks as the example of that. So New Orleans, I think, is still in a good spot. Maybe let's do that tomorrow. We'll look at trade target names for the center spot that kind of fit into that traded player exception. And we can kind of go through that list. I think that's going to be a good show. And maybe some others too. We should talk about DeAndre Ayton as well. And is that a guy that you can go and get? Even if I don't particularly love him, it's a useful player. Could you go and acquire someone like that to really make the difference? And how good does that make this team? And what would a trade look like? Because it would probably at that point need to be a 3-team deal. So a lot more to come this week here on Locked On Pelicans. We'll look at DeJounte Murray as well. I want to talk about his fit, what to expect from him as he's starting to kind of get set and everything's finalized here in New Orleans around that, because I do really like the fit here with him on this Pelicans team, with or without Brandon Ingram too. So let me know what you want to hear about on Locked On Pelicans, the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.